San Diego. So it's a little bit early, but that's okay. I wish I was there. I really enjoy, I don't, those of you that know me or don't know me, my husband actually is Hungarian. His mother came from Hungary. Um, and so we have a very close connection with this chapter. And I really appreciate the ability to be able to kind of present something that's very new and very different. This whole idea of the PMO, those of you that are aware, PMI actually acquired the PMO Alliance and as a result have incorporated that in and have a new practice guide that has to do with the PMO and the certification, the PMI PMO CP, which is certified practitioner. So I'm going to kind of go through this as to, kind of what's included in it and look at some of the different aspects and how this is different from the way that we currently talk about a PMO. I teach the PMP, and obviously on the PMP and the CAPM, we talk about the PMO. There's three types. There's a supportive, where we provide templates and policies and procedures to project managers. There's the controlling, where we kind of become the governance to make sure that those policies and procedures are being followed. And then there's also the directive, which is where we start to look at, maybe the organization in which different people actually reside, more of a functional organization. What we're talking about now is a little different as far as, kind of what is a PMO in today's world. And part of it is that we have to look at it from the standpoint of the organization. What do they need? That maturity that's needed to be able to become more strategic as we work through, making sure that we're able to improve the way that projects are done, making sure they support the organization's strategic objectives and priorities by doing that. And this whole idea of making sure that we continue to provide that business value, looking at it from that standpoint. One of the things that Agile did when we kind of incorporated that mindset in, it really focused more on value delivery, making sure that whatever we're doing with a project really ends up providing value back to the organization. And the key becomes here is, in order to do that, we also have to make sure that we can provide the best oversight, the best early risk identification, and the appropriate governance in order to make that happen. So this really is bridging the gap now between what's actually happening and what the organization has in place and what's really needed, looking at constraints and challenges that are faced by that organization and becoming that strategic partner to work with them. Now, we talk about the idea of being customer-centric. This is one of the key aspects, is that there's no one size fits all as far as the PMO. So when we talk about the customer-centric, first we talk about the customer. The customers are those people who are actually going to directly receive and use the services that we provide through the PMO. Now, in addition to those, we also have stakeholders. And the stakeholders are those additional individuals, organizations, groups who are going to have an interest in or be affected, which is the typical definition of a stakeholder. But this is more looking at what we actually are doing within the PMO, what kind of services we can provide. When we talk about the PMO, there's a couple of strategic elements that we have to put in place. One is a mandate, which is where we have to look at why we're doing the PMO. What is the why? What's the purpose, the scope, the justification? And then we look at the governance part of it, which is the who and when. This is how we're going to actually make decisions, what kind of roles and responsibilities, the accountability that we're going to have. And this is going to guide how we actually work through that those different services that we're going to provide. The last is the strategy, and the strategy is really what? The objectives, the approaches, the practices that we'll use to be able to deliver this value. This becomes then the roadmap to help us serve the organization and translate that mandate of why we're doing it into actual plans as to how we do that. As we moved, I should say, from the PMO Alliance into PMI, they decided to work through with this idea of a flywheel. The fact that it's a continuous cycle that we have to go through to continually improve, continuous improvement, like everything else, but looking at the needs and getting the feedback as to what we're doing in order to make sure that we're providing the right services at the right level at the right time. It starts to change from being a very tactical organization supporting projects with templates and policies and procedures into one that's trying to help the organization have more success as they go through. All of these areas, as we go through exploration, design, deployment, enhancement, and realization, are all revolving around the customer itself, and therefore continuing to focus on that customer as we go through. We've taken those and we've broken them down into 10 different areas. So each one of these 5 areas around the outside are broken down into more specific areas that we would concentrate on. So let's start with the first one. Let's talk about the exploration. That's where we're going to start to look at how we're going to come up with strategies for building that awareness of what the PMO can offer to the various stakeholders, explaining what the value is and how that success of the PMO can influence the value perception for the customers themselves. In order to do that, what we have to do is a needs assessment. And that's where we gather critical information based on who the customers are, what their challenges are, and what their needs are. And then we start to determine strategies as to how we're going to engage with them throughout this life cycle. When we look at it, there's really 2 pieces to it. There's an awareness building where we have to understand and demonstrate what the value is, both tangible and intangible. Now, tangible, we can measure. We can actually measure the intangible, especially things like customer service. Understanding what that perception of value is, but it's very definitely going to be influenced by the maturity of the organization or parts of the organization within project management. The other piece of it becomes the idea of just the needs assessment. This is typical of what we do before we start a project. We go back and we talk to the people in the business. What is the situation? What are we trying to accomplish? Where can we gather some data and analyze it to see maybe where we're doing a really good job and where we could use some help? Looking at that gap and identifying opportunities where we can fill in those gaps. But we have to continue to keep in mind what is the culture of the organization, as well as the capabilities of the PMO. And as we start to mature that PMO and culture, we're able to more support different aspects for the organization. It doesn't say that you have to be a strategic PMO to be the most important. there's areas where we need to have that balance of tactical support as well as maybe some of the strategic support. This culture itself that we're talking about within that project management, OPM as we call it, talking about making sure that we can align with the goals of the PMO. We get the buy-in from the organization as to the value and benefits that we can provide. Providing that psychological safety, that feedback to allow people to present ideas, to identify needs, challenge. Give us the feedback of things that are working, things that aren't, and using that in a positive environment to continuously improve. And then taking that whole idea of the servant leadership principles, where we're there to support the organization, the teams, the customers, and even those stakeholders that indirectly will receive the results of what we're doing. So once we have this idea of kind of where we're going, then we have to, of course, go into design. And here, when we get into design, what we're starting to do is figure out what that value proposition is. What is the purpose, the value? How do we align what we're doing with the business, the organization's goals? And look at those needs assessment outcomes to figure out where we can actually support and possibly improve certain areas. Making sure that we're looking at value-driven solutions for both the PMO as well as for the various project teams. This is where we actually create this structural framework where we do the mandate, we do the strategy, we do the governance. So this is something that's going to have to be done continually. This is not a once and done. This isn't like a project charter. This is something that we do on a continual basis, usually maybe once a year, maybe once every 6 months, where we go back and make sure that what we're focusing on, why we're here, what we're trying to accomplish, what that strategy is, and how we're going to implement it. And that strategy has to change as the maturity of the organization changes. And then we have to start to look at how we're going to actually deploy the services that we've identified are needed. With that, we'll have to go back and look at the people who are within the PMO itself, the PMO team. What competencies do they have? Because just like any other project, we're going to have people that have strengths and weaknesses, and we're going to have to marry that up to the different work that we're doing. So once we've designed what we're doing, then we have to look at how we're going to deploy it. And here is where we start to onboard these services that we're going to provide. Looking at what tasks are needed in order to put these services together, to deliver them, as well as manage once we've started to deliver those. And then we have to figure out who's going to be able to do the work, how many resources within the PMO. Now, this doesn't have to be a large organization. And sometimes it's an organization that has revolving individuals in it. When I worked at IBM, one of the things that we all had to do as senior project managers was spend a few months within the PMO, because what we were doing is looking at the other projects and what they were doing, especially looking at those OPAs, organizational process assets, that had been archived at the end of a project to see maybe our templates need to be updated, things like that. So it's a continually looking at how we can change. If we take any particular service and start to onboard it, first thing we have to do is engage, prepare those customers so that they're aware this is what we're going to be doing. A lot of times these are pilots that we create. develop the training programs that are needed for that service so we understand whether it's a methodology we're providing, maybe it's additional reporting, maybe it's some basic project management techniques that we have to look at, especially, let's just say, for instance, we have a lot of problems with our schedule. And so we have to start looking at it from the standpoint of how come we're not meeting our schedule? Maybe we need to do a little bit more of estimating what it's going to take. Those are some of the things that we would look at. Implementing a pilot, getting some feedback, and turning around then and adjusting it as we go forward. Every time we do this, we end up with the ability to be able to improve what we've come up with. Once we have that service, though, we've got to have a support infrastructure for it. Just like everything else, you do a project, you complete it, you transition it over to the customer, but there has to be a support organization in case that customer continues to have maybe questions as they start to utilize the result that we created. So we have to look at that, put that infrastructure, that support in place so that we can handle any of those additional things that might come up. In addition, just like we do with benefit realization on a project, we need to monitor and evaluate whether the service that we provided from our standpoint from the PMO is actually performing at the expected level. Is very similar once again when we start a project and we have expectations of the benefits that are going to be received, and by the time we get to the end of the project and we transition the result over, we need to have in place that infrastructure so that we can monitor and evaluate whether that benefit that was expected actually was received, whether it's the metrics or whether it's just the reporting of the improvements that we've been able to accomplish. And then at some point in time, we're going to take this pilot that we've been working on and continually updating and improving and turn it into a full service operation. So it really ends up being in place, its ability, it's able to be used. And then what we have to do, conduct that review involving everybody, making sure that it's ready to go, um, and then transition it to full service operation where we support those different pieces. So when we talk about that deployment, it's really that service operation. It's the ability to have that execution of those services that we're providing. And a whole range of different services that you have out there, from just basic templates. Maybe it's looking at certain areas where there's some additional training that's needed. Maybe it's putting into place a methodology, putting some structure in certain areas. I'm such a big fan of hybrid as opposed to predictive or adaptive by itself. There's things that we learn from each one. And I laughingly say, even building a house is hybrid. There's not a single way to do a house. There's things that are going to have to be different depending on who's going to be living in it, who's going to be buying it, where the house is built, things like that. So there's going to be areas that are going to have to be changed depending on the situation. That's what we have to look at. We have to continue to execute, provide these services, but we also need to put in place some service level agreements, understanding that if we have a request for somebody, a project team that needs our help, how long is it going to take? How are we going to measure what we're doing? Do we have the resources that we need in order to do that? So sometimes, even though a service is really needed, if we don't have the people currently who are able to support that, maybe it's a matter of where we have to kind of teach ourselves and get our own people up to speed on it. But we do need to put in place too some sort of quality control measures that and govern ourselves. So in order to be consistent as to how we're going to do this, we need to make sure that we understand what those different measures actually are going to be. We move into the enhancement stage. This is where once we have that in place, now what we have to do is continue to monitor it. It's like everything else. We put in place, we realize there's certain areas that may need a little bit added to them, maybe a little bit more detail. And as a result, we continually look at what kind of improvement do we have to have there. We also need to look at the maturity of the organization and how what we're doing aligns with the organization's goals as well as those expectations of the customer. This is like if I do a project and I just come up with this great idea, but there's really no need for it. I finish it and then I'm really surprised that why is nobody using all this work that I did? Well, because either the time was not right, or maybe there was not a need, maybe the need was in something else. And that's what we have to figure out because a lot of times the maturity that we have of that service, it starts really small. Starts with, for instance, just instead of a full-blown methodology with all the documents or artifacts that have to be produced and all the review points, maybe we choose one or two and we start small. We look at where the big need is, and then we align that. But once again, as the PMO, we're sitting between the projects and the organization. And so we should understand what those organizational goals and objectives are and making sure that what we're doing is aligning with those. It's hard because you're going to have stakeholders that are going to want certain types of projects done, but that's not the strategic objectives, and that's not the goal where the organization is going right now. It has to be supported at that level. Throughout this time, we have to look at the people itself in the PMO. Now, these could be project managers, they could be people that are, say, risk management people, maybe they're more procurement, maybe they're more involved in, say, the whole business analysis, understanding what the customer's needs are, and being able to do some deep dives into that type of data and process improvement that those are needed. Teaching ourselves, coaching, learning from each other within the PMO itself. Now, there are times when, yes, we're going to realize that maybe we need to back off on a couple of services until we get a little bit more competencies within the project, or maybe we treat it more as a pilot, both from the standpoint of our delivery, but also from the standpoint of the people who are going to be supporting it. But the key is here, what we're trying to do is continually look at where are those gaps in the performance of the projects? Where are they not meeting expectations? Where might there not be as much collaboration, especially collaboration with the stakeholders, with the business individuals, and making sure that, once again, those organizational goals are known, followed, that vision of what the organization is trying to do is very apparent to everybody that's working on the project itself. The service monitoring is the first step of this, where we really look into how we're delivering, how we're delivering that service, looking at tracking ourselves, how we're measuring it, how we're evaluating it. Now, once again, this is really looking at the outcomes that are immediately tangible and being able to look at those, but also to be able to look at some of the service outcomes which have a broader value. But looking at that monitoring from the standpoint of continually helping us put those standards in place, making sure the customers trust and work with us, making sure that we look at those processes that we've identified and continually reinforcing that value to the organization of what we're actually doing. Those areas have to be continually done, just like everything else. We are a service organization. This is where the whole movement has kind of changed, is rather than just sending out things and making things available and then doing that oversight. What we want to do is we want to look at both short-term results as well as long-term results and making sure that that's continually happening. So we monitor how we're doing things, understand where there's areas of improvement, and then we actually look at that from the standpoint of how are we going to improve that process? So looking at that once again, as the organization matures in the way it does projects, the fact that we can then start to mature the services that we deliver, those systematic improvements, just like everything else, continuous improvement, Kaizen, PDCA, PDSA, all of those quality improvement processes we talk about, we need to use them on ourselves too, to see those services that we're doing. Over time, as the organization matures and the PMO itself matures, we start to move from being that basic support of the templates and the processes and procedures and things that we provide to the organization and start to look at more of a strategic view where we're looking at how we're going to help move forward the organization. Now, a lot of people say, well, it's the best PMOs are very strategic. Well, maybe in some organizations that might be true, but I would kind of beg to differ that even in an organization where most of the services are strategic, you still have areas that can use some basic tactical support. So not one size, once again, does not fit all. It's like a doctor. You walk in and you say you have a stomach ache, and the doctor prescribes something, as opposed to saying, so maybe why are you having a stomach ache? Now go back to that 5 whys we talk about. Why are you having a stomach ache? Well, I ate something. Well, why did you eat that? And on and on. Understanding what the real root cause is that we're trying to help support and using that to take that service as the organization matures to a higher level, meeting what the current needs, but also starting to anticipate where we may need to go in the future. And this is why this ring is a continuous flow. It goes around and around from the standpoint that we're continually looking at what we're doing, but we're also continually evaluating the results of what we're doing in order to have a better idea of where we need to go and maybe what areas we need to support going forward. The realization itself. This is where we start measuring the value and making sure that that value is enough that the organization is going to continue to support this. There is an investment in the PMO. There's an investment of people. There's an investment of time. There's things that have to be done. And what we have to do, though, is we have to understand what that value is to different parts of the organization in different areas. And then what we have to do is make sure that we can put in place a way that we can measure that. We need to measure the value delivery, we need to measure how we're doing, maybe measuring based on our supporting certain things like better reporting. Are we able to get additional collaboration with people? Are we able to reduce some of the risk that we might have, that uncertainty, because at least we identify it and we put together a response as to how we're going to do that? But continually looking at that role of being able to support the organization and be that partner by delivering and being more service oriented. Understanding and describing how that contribution that we're making can actually be measured. We're just like everything else. We have to measure, but we have to measure what counts. And sometimes it's just customer service, and sometimes it's um, net promoter score, as we do sometimes on projects. Maybe it's a feel good, we make people feel good, we do better job, those type of measurements that we can put in. But we need to be able to figure out how we actually can measure and do that measurement and really review it to see where we can improve ourselves. So we need to continually go back. Remember, this whole centers around the customer. Looking at that customer, what kind of activities do we do that are going to enhance their life, how they're going to do better, the improvement they are able to make based on what we actually are providing. And that gets us back into being able to show the value of the PMO itself. So when we start talking about this realization, and it drops down into these two pieces, the first one being the value delivery, making sure that we link the activities we're doing with measurable outcomes so that we connect those to things that are happening that we can measure and establish that measurement framework so that we can assess. We can define how we're going to measure, and then we actually can do the assessment afterwards, looking at the impact analysis to make sure that those contributions have actually made a difference. And looking at the benefit realization again, as we start to see how we're going to provide the benefit expectations that we had when we put these services and support activities in place. The other piece of it comes from this whole realization. And that's where we look at the recognition, where we can acknowledge, we can actually appreciate and internalize the benefits that have been received. This is where we start to look at from the customer standpoint. Once again, we measure the value of the services that we've been able to provide. Make sure that the value is meaningful to the actual stakeholders themselves. And we want to differentiate between delivery and recognition. Delivery produces results, but the recognition we're looking for is really making sure that that work that we've done has made an impact, provided those additional benefits. We get that because we have to look at the effectiveness of the PMO from the stakeholder's point of view, and having the stakeholders acknowledge that what we've done has really helped and become more valuable for them. So in order to be able to continue to work through, we take that validation of that value and use it to be able to continue to sustain and grow what we're actually doing. There's a lot of overlap when we get into this realization, especially with the benefit management process. And those of you that are project managers and are not aware of the actual program standard from PMI would highly recommend that you go take a look at it. First of all, it's very small, but the domains that are in program management, they are so apropos to both the PMO as well as a project itself. The idea of understanding and gathering what those expectations are, and then taking those and planning how you're going to deliver them. And the fact that benefits sometimes can be delivered short term, maybe some small benefits, some outcomes that can be improved as opposed to the full. And then looking at how we transition all those improvements we've made over to the customer. But it doesn't stop there. What we have to look at then is, how do we sustain this? You know, we can't just say, okay, well, I'm going to give you a methodology, but I'm not going to ever check to see if you used it or whether we need to make some improvements to it. No, I need to continually understand what we provided, what is appropriate based on the situation, and then be able to move and grow from that as we go forward. So PMI has put together this new certification, and this is really looking at the standpoint of looking at how we can make some changes to our PMOs. I can't tell you the number of times as we started to move agile approaches into an organization, I'd hear them say, we need to implode the PMO, because the PMO is so into governing artifacts, documents, reviewing, things like this. And we get into an adaptive mode, and we don't have those. We don't have a business requirement document anymore. We don't have a system design document anymore. But the PMO is still requiring us to have that, because they're saying, well, how do I know you did your analysis if you don't create this document? So what we have to do is look at how we can provide value to the organization and allow that adaptability that we have put in place with hybrid type of projects and strategic objectives, maybe pilots, maybe prototypes. Now, if we're in an organization that is trying to continually improve, the PMO has to support the activities that the team has to do in order to do that. So understanding the organization, where it's going, where its maturity. Whenever we talk about situational management or situational leadership as maybe one of the best leadership techniques we have, well, maybe we could apply that here too. This is situational PMO. This is situational project support. In the fact that we are supporting aspects of a situation as opposed to having this one size fits all that we're just going to provide depending on what we've come up with. Templates are, I mean, I'm not a real fan of templates, I have to tell you. I really am around people that we refer to as template zombies. I don't know how that translates to you, but they live and die to fill out templates, whether they're appropriate or not. And the idea is the template should be a starting point. It should be a place to start. The same thing with the PMO. It should be a place to start, but it has to be modified as we move through. What this certification is doing also is helping look at different project professionals to maybe take on some additional knowledge and skills that could be applied to projects themselves, um, maybe within the PMO or maybe just within the project themselves. But the idea is that looking at different ways of doing things, just elevating that idea of focusing on where the organization is trying to do, where they're trying to go. Understand that strategic value, which once again, why in the PMP exam are 80% of it on the business environment? It's because what we want project managers to do is not just focus on how do I put my scope and my schedule and my budget and my risk register, et cetera, together, but why am I doing the project in the first place? What is the vision? What are those kind of external requirements, especially regulations that we have to abide by? I have to understand beyond just that actual basic scope, schedule, and budget for my project itself. And this is the same thing with the PMO. We're starting to look at the idea that we need to be able to be a little more flexible. We need to customize. We need to continuously improve as we put these models together. This is a support service organization now. It provides services to projects depending on their needs, depending on the maturity, and how we have to adjust to that. And obviously, providing a service may need to actually be adapted to that particular group. It may need to continue to grow and mature, and we need to be aware of that. And that's one of those areas that we have to look at. So with that, do we have any questions that we want to kind of address?
As now there's no questions in the chat box, but write down if you have any questions. Certifications and this one. What was your feeling? What was the for you personally in this PMO CP certification?
I'm sorry, it was kind of garbled. Can you say it again?
So as you hold many PMI certifications and you earned this PMO CP newly, my question was, what was the added value for you personally in doing that new certification?
I think the key is that having worked in a PMO before and it being so structured as to what do we do, what kind of PMO we are, this whole idea of being more service oriented, it gets back to trying to understand what the needs are. So, Tomas, you said, how's a PMO become supportive controlling of directives, that organic or strategic process? Normally, what happens is the PMO starts out as more of a supportive organization, providing policies and procedures and templates and things like that to support the organization. The problem that happens is they put together a certain set of things and hope that that will work for all projects, which is where it starts to fall down. When it starts to become controlling is especially in predictive, where you can control and you can do the oversight and governance of, okay, if you're supposed to create a risk register, then I, as the PMO, am going to come down and make sure that you have responses for all of your risks. You've identified the probability and impact, things like that. And it becomes a little bit more of a governance role, which works for predictive approaches, but it doesn't work in adaptive. And so as a result, we have to look at, well, how do we support an adaptive project? How do we make sure that we're getting the information that the team needs so that they can actually complete user stories within an iteration, things like that. So it becomes more. It could be that this starts out very small within an organization. I think in the kind of the older model, it kind of became larger and larger, but it became kind of like where things have to be checked, as opposed to looking when you start moving over. Um, I would say you're talking about what company size would you end up having a PMO? I've worked, I mean, in fact, I'm doing this presentation on Thursday for another port place up in California. The PMO is very strong there. That organization, it's a hospital, it's a healthcare, and the PMO only has a couple of people in it. I would say, maybe the IT department has 20 people. But the key is that what they do is they provide support um, to those project managers and team members as they're making sure that they're doing that. They are doing a lot of change management where they're changing the way, electronic medical records, things like that. And that's where a lot of the PMO is supporting with some of those changes. But yeah, I don't think um, I can't give you some companies off the top of my head right now, besides the few that I've worked with. But and I've worked in PMOs that have been very supportive, and I've been working in PMOs that are kind of that old-fashioned, here's what we're going to give you, this is what you have to do, and it doesn't align with what the organization is trying to do as they go through. But um, there's a lot of webinars now that are being done on the PMO. Um, the actual certification itself is now part of the ATP program, so we are starting to teach that um, as an ATP course. So the materials all put together for us as instructors. And once again, in order to have that course delivered, you have to have the certification yourself. So they are being a little pickier on this, but the certification, actually, as far as requirements, if you have your PMP, all you need is the training. So there's no experience required on it, because what they want you to do is start to learn what it includes in it. Any other questions?
So maybe I know that you prepared a little surprise for us. Maybe while our participants are thinking about questions, may we play that?
I would just highly recommend that you go out and look at the new practice guide. Especially remember, if you are a PMI member, you have access to so many documents, including the new PMO practice guide coming up, getting ready for the 8th edition of the PMBOK guide. The Agile Certified Practice Guide is in draft mode right now. Review, it will be out probably the first of the year. Those practice guides are so, so good. And once again, that's really where you can start to move forward on those. Okay. And feel free, you've got my address, or my email address here. If you've got additional questions later, please feel free to contact me, and I'll either put you in place. Andrea, I'll try and see if I can find um, some examples and try to get back with you on that one, because I'm sure I can. um, I'm in very close contact with Americo, who's basically he came from the PMO Alliance and he's now part of PMI, but he and I are working very closely together. Um, so I will check with him and see if I can get some exact examples of other companies that we can do that with.
If you have any feedback, we will share with the audience.
Yeah. So I want to leave you, since we've got a few minutes and I know that it's getting late for you all, but Steve and I kind of put together something special for you.
álmok földjén, hol a stratégia szárnyra kell. Mi vagyunk a tisztánlátás mesterei, szabadon, hevesen. A kezdéstől a célig vezetjük az utat. Mérföldköveink csillagként ragyognak, minden lépés nyomot hagy. A projektek világában, hol az álom száll, ott van az út a siker.
Wow. He hit the...
Fényesen, tisztán, a PMO-val melletted biztos lesz az irány. Csapatokat vezetve jön el a szebb holnap már. Táncolj a ritmusra, érezd a PMO szívét. Álmokból valóság lesz, ahol cél és tett összeér. Mi vagyunk a projekt nemzet dobbanása, büszkén állunk. Egy hang, egy látomás, mi válaszolunk. Stratégiai céllal, irányítás a kézben. Hatást tervezünk, minden igényére készen. Hatóköridő, kockázat, költség, összhangban vezetünk. A PMO-val értéket vetünk, célokat igazítunk. Az üzleti álomhoz a folyamat áramlik, mint cigány dallamhoz a kockázatkezelés a terőd. Meglátod, a PMO-val kulcs vagy, kiutat mutat, átkötés. Érdekeltek gyűlnek, csapatok egyesülnek. Mi vagyunk az iránytű az éjszakában, ha elcsendesülnek. A felfedezéstől a megvalósításig tisztul a kép. Innováció minden részben, ez a mi szép remény. Jó, PMO, nyisd ki az ajtót, tudáshoz, készséghez és még sokhoz. Stratégiától a változásig emelkedünk. A PMO-val mindent elérhetünk. Eredmények nyelvén szólunk, nem csak terveken. Összekötjük az üzletet a tettek erejében. Irányítás elegánsan, agilitás erővel. Stratégiát alakítunk, fényben, nem sötétbe. Vezetés és változás, méltósággal bátran. Érdekelteket bevonva minden határban. Globális szabványokkal, büszkén, tisztán. A PMO-val vezetünk, biztosan, vidáman. Táncolj a ritmusra, érezd a PMO szívét. Álmokból valóság lesz, ahol cél és tett összeér. Felemelkedünk, virágzunk, miénk a show a szervezet szívében. PMO! Hadd vezessen minket a cigány ritmus árama. A PMO ereje és célja legyen velünk ma. Tervezőknek, álmodóknak, akik fényben járnak. Mi vezetünk bátran, miénk a csillag.
Thank you. I thought that'd be fun. It reminded us of the music that both his mom and dad always listened to. And so put the words to it and kind of played with it. It's AI. That's unbelievable what it can do, even the translation. But yeah, we'll go ahead and if you can, yeah, the music was an AI. There's a website called Suno, SUNO. You put the words in, and then you select the genre of music to go behind it. We actually use Copilot to do the translation. So, and had to check it first to see if it was close, because you don't know how, I mean, we can't read Hungarian, so we don't know, but hopefully that, it was kind of fun. But anyway, yeah, I think, Victor, you have the actual recording, right?
Yes, I have the file, and I was thinking about if there's any legal or other rules, if we could upload it to YouTube or somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I on some of the other ones, I've actually put the words on the slide, but I didn't on this one. But anyway, but yeah, hopefully it kind of was a fun way to kind of take a heavy kind of presentation, make it a little bit fun at the end. So, but I do appreciate, I appreciate you all, especially at this time of day, sticking around, because that is, you know, you're used to being able to do this at lunch, and now we're kind of doing it after work. So hopefully I'll see all of you one of these days. Get back over there so we can do a course or whatever. So appreciate it.
Thank you, Greta, for your time and this fantastic presentation. And the song was a very big success, it's sure.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming, and see you soon. Goodbye.